Good morning. My name is Laura Sanchez-Sanchez. I'm from the University of Granada, Spain, and I'm going to present the conference entitled, I'm going to show you, Psychological Impact of the COVID-19 Confinement and its Relationship with Meditation, based on the research of the same name. The study was carried out together with Oliver Jimenez from the University of Malaga and with José Manuel Garcia-Montes from the University of Almería. The World Health Organization declares a global COVID-19 pandemic on March 11, 2020. At the time of this investigation, with 118,000 cases in 114 countries. At that moment, in Europe, over 2.5 million people have been infected, and Spain has had the third most cases in Europe and the sixth most deaths. Because of the rapid expansion of the virus, a state of emergency is declared in our country. This state of emergency imposed a closure of establishment, ceasing of all except essential activity, and half confinement of the population. Previous quarantines, for example, because of flu, show the negative impact of confinement. They reported fear in over 20% of the population, 18% sadness, and 10% blame, and a high prevalence of distress, stress, depression, and bad mood. Some studies showed a positive association between length of quarantine and increase in post-traumatic stress symptoms and avoidance behavior. In a previous COVID-19 study, the authors reported that young people and students are also more vulnerable because of schools and university closing, as well as social isolation. In this respect, possible protective factors could be mindfulness or self-compassion, as mentioned in recent reviews. For example, it seems that mindfulness-based treatment are effective in reducing post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. For this reason, the objectives of this study were to explore the impact of confinement due to COVID-19 on the mental and emotional health, anxiety, depression, stress of other Spanish-speaking, to explore whether practice of some type of meditation or self-compassion could be a protective factor against this impact, and to explore the relationships between the above-mentioned variables, anxiety, depression, stress, and so on, and the socio-demographic variables selected, for example, age, quality of cohabitation, treatment of those confined, etc. We selected a total of 412 adults from 63 Spanish provinces with a mean age of 40.48 participated in the survey out of a total of 420. Most of the participants were Spanish women, between 18 and 73 years, with no change in their employment because of COVID-19, uh, 73%, uh, university education, and did not practice any type of meditation. Data collected for the study were sociodemographic, for example, gender, age, nationality, marital status, occupation, employment, education, health, whether under treatment or not, and if so, what, quality of cohabitation during the pandemic, cohabitation with a case of COVID-19, whether religion or not, and if so, practicing or not, and whether they practice meditation, and if so, what type. The mental health was evaluated using the following scales: depression and anxiety and stress scale 21, which consists of 21 items evaluating the frequency and severity of emotional symptoms, depression, anxiety, and stress experienced during the previous week. Impact of event scale, IAS, which consists of 15 items evaluating subjective stress from stressful or traumatic experiences in the previous week, with two subscales, intrusion and avoidance. And finally, self-compassion scale, short for SES, SF, which consists of 12 items that evaluate self-compassion throughout three subscales: mindfulness, self-kindness, and common humanity, and their opposites: over-identification, self-judgment, and isolation. An online survey form was prepared using Google Form, which include information on the study, telling the participants that they will not receive any compensation for taking part in it, a series of socio-demographic and additional variables of interest, and the DAS 21, IES, and SCS scales. The study protocol was approved by the University of Malaga Bioethics Committee. An ANOVA was done to evaluate the between group differences in the socio-demographic variables, and then a student's t-test was applied for comparison between each pair of groups. Further, the effect size was calculated for those that were statistically significant. Finally, the bivariate correlation was calculated to evaluate the relationship of the different socio-demographic ordinal variables and subscales. In all the analysis, p less than 0.05 was considered statistically significant. Some of the most important results are, with respect to correlations, after the correlation analysis, other age was observed to be related to high frequency in practicing meditation, better cohabitation, more common humanity, and more mindfulness. On the contrary, less stress, anxiety, and depression was related with other age. Higher education was significantly related to more frequent practice of meditation and an increase in the variables in the SCS scale. For example, common humanities, self-kindness. So, more frequent meditation practice was significantly related to less depression and an increase in SCS scale variables. Better cohabitation quality was significantly related to higher scores on SCS variables and, as you can see, and lower score on the rest of scales. IES, that's 21. Finally, as expected, the psychological scales were significantly correlated with each other. The general mean on the task 21 scale for participants' stress was 6.67. For anxiety, 3.88, and for depression, 4.51, which reflects mild depression and anxiety, and the stress score was not symptomatic. On the IES scale, the mean for intrusion was 12.61, for avoidance 13.66, and on the total scale it was 26.22, which shows severe symptomatology. Finally, on the SCS scale, mean self-kindness was 6.46, and for common humanity, 6.44. Sorry, is 6.44, and in mindfulness it was 6.69. The socio-demographic variables that had the strongest relationship with psychological impact were being under treatment or not, age, and quality of cohabitation during the quarantine, indicating that not being under any treatment implied lower scores of intrusion and avoidance. Being young was related to higher scores of stress and depression, particularly between young adults and between young adults and middle age, as you can see. Furthermore, an improvement in quality of cohabitation was related to lower total IES score, specifically between very good and good cohabitation, very good and poor, very good and very poor, and good and poor. In summary, the profile related to the greatest negative impact is related to being young, having a worse cohabitation, being retired, or living with a positive for COVID-19. And this is linked to more stress, depression, intrusive thoughts, avoidance, as well as increased post-traumatic stress, according to previous studies. And the related profile with less negative impact is not being in treatment, having a better cohabitation, and being a student. These have less intrusive thoughts, less avoidance, and less post-traumatic stress. Another of the objectives of the study proposed self-compassion and mindfulness as protective factors against the impact of confinement. It is worth mentioning that participants' scores of the various self-compassion subscales, mindfulness, self-kindness, and common humanity, were negative related in both the IES and DAS 21 scales, suggesting that self-compassion might be an important protective factor fostering emotional resilience. Um, the results show that higher scores in self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness were related to not being under treatment, and in turn, higher scores of self-kindness and common humanity were related to higher cohabitation quality. There were no significant relationship of mindfulness practice with lower scores on the IES or DAS-21 scales. But there was an increase in the self-compassion scale, as was to be expected, given the relationship of mindfulness with self-compassion. This study has some limitations, especially due to the limited resources available and the urgency in its implementation during the state of emergency. We cannot establish any causal relationships between the variables studied. The sample was mostly comprised of women and only an adult population. So it is not a true representation of the entire population. Further studies should have a larger and more homogeneous sample and use a more complex sample strategy or perform a prospective study that would enable a more specific research to support the need for health initiatives focused on improving the mental health of the participants, promoting attitudes or behaviors for coping with confinement. In spite of these limitations, the results of this study provide important information on the psychological and social impact of the first 3 weeks of COVID-19 quarantine period, including that self-compassion might be an important protective factor and may be used as a reference in future epidemic or outbreaks of the virus that provoke similar short or long-term situation to generate hypotheses for improvement or prevention and intervention. The results could have provide a baseline for evaluating the psychological and social consequences during the rest of the COVID-19 epidemic, which was still underway at the time of writing. You can send your doubts to this email address. Thank you very much for your attention.